Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the Arturia Moog Modular, and today we're talking about the sequencer. This is an out-of-the-box preset and this is what we get. Single key on the keyboard plays that, and it's this thing here that's generating the tone. Let's figure out how. First things first, before we actually dive into the sequencer itself, just want to bring your attention to this little button here. It's in the VCA, it's called In, and it tells you where the VCA is getting its trigger from. Ordinarily, when you're building normal patches, it'll be set to keyboard trigger on. When you hit a key on the keyboard, then the VCA is basically going to be triggered and will take its source from the rest of the synthesizer. But when you're in sequencer mode and you want it to play this sequencer, set it to sequence trigger. If we set it to keyboard trigger and I play a note on the keyboard, it will play the sequence, but there's that underlying note being played as well. You don't want to hear that note. You just want to fire the sequencer. Okay, so really easy to forget, really easy to miss that it's there, and if you're building a sequence, make sure you repatch it. Okay, let's have a look at the sequence itself, figure out what's going on. So we can see the white lights going across, and it's clearly playing 8 notes. Which 8 notes is it playing? Why have we got all these knobs down here? Well, let's have a look at the oscillator driver. This is the oscillator that's making the sound, and underneath all these patches, see that little S1 there? That means it's taking its sequence data, the notes that it's supposed to play, from sequencer number 1, which is this here. This is 2, this is 3. So you've got 3 independent sequencers, each of 8 notes, and at the moment the driver is taking its note data from S1. So it's taking this note, 0, and then another 0, and then another, and another, and then a 12, 0, 0, 12. So whatever note we play on the keyboard, you can hear it playing those corresponding octave bounces. If I set that to S2, it's going to play these notes instead. There's a 3, and a 7, and an 8. It's a different sequence. And if I set it to S3, it'll play all constant basic notes. Now then, you can hear it's going da 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 dum da dum da da. It's not playing 8 individual identifiable notes. Why is that? Because these 2 notes down here, 5 and 6, are joined together. They're linked together. If I unclick all these link buttons, okay, and it's only when we start linking notes together that we get that doubling effect. That note is now twice as long. Let's make it slow. Let's slow it down so you can see this light's pulsing along at the moment at tempo times 4. So it's 400 BPM. So if I pull that down so we can really hear what's going on. So you can hear from 8 round to 1 is linked because of that link button there, and 5 and 6 are linked. Okay. In addition to being able to link notes together, we can make notes repeat any number of times. So this down here, let's set that to 4. See what happens now. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it's spending 4 beats, 4 internal sequencer beats on that note there. Now it's only playing one of them, it's just playing the first one, and then it's basically holding it. If I make the note longer, it'll play it for as long as it can up to this length. But if I click this little button down here, it's going to play individual notes for the 4 beats that it's sat there. So it's linking those 2 notes together, which is why you're getting the pause, and then it's playing 4 individual notes. So by turning the repeat button on, this is the repeat line here. So if you turn that little button on, it will play every note it can. Okay, back down to 1. Speed it up a bit. Okay, so that's S3. What's S4? There are only 3 rows of knobs, so why have we got an S4? Well, S4 is the chained sequencer. So this is controlled down here. So you can see at the moment the chain is 1 and 2, which means that now when we play a note, we're going to get a 16 note sequence comprising those 8 notes followed by these 8 notes. Okay. And if we made this chain L1, 2, 3, it will play all 24 notes. Okay, that was a 24 note sequence. In addition to L1, 2, 3 or L1, 2, we can set, say, L1, 3. So that's the top row. And there's the bottom row, all the same note. That's all the L's. And you can go backwards. Okay. We also have C options instead. So this stands for change, and it basically means after playing every single note, it will go to the next row down. So this is almost impossible to show you visually. If I make it very, very slow, let's find out where it's starting. So it's going to start with this note in the middle, and then it's going to switch to the next row down and then come up and go down in diagonals. Let's try and follow it. And so on and so on. So really weird, kind of at normal speed, completely impossible to actually follow what's going on. But it can be really cool. So it's one of those things that once you've built a sequence, try the different chain effects and see what different kinds of sounds you get, and some of them are just going to be, wow, didn't expect those notes to come together. So that's chaining. Each of the sequencers has a smooth setting. So let's go back to just one, S1. So this is now just the top row of 8. Merges the notes together. Okay, you can go forwards and backwards. When you start going forwards and backwards over multiple lines, we go back to S4 again. And let's switch this to L so we have some remote chance of actually figuring out what we're doing. So we're now going to oscillate between L1 and L2, trying to follow what it's doing. Okay, I'll leave you to figure that one out yourself. It's basically going backwards and forwards over the first line. Down to line 2. Backwards over line 2. Back up to line 1. Okay, forwards, backwards, down. Forwards, backwards, up. Forwards, backwards, down. Very nice indeed. And again, when we set it to a reasonable tempo, you can just get some really awesome effects. You saw messing around with length before. This is the length of each individual note. Make it really, really short. You get a percussion kind of thing. These little buttons over here are really important. Just make sure that they're set to keyboard trigger on, keyboard trigger off, so that when you play the note on the keyboard, it fires the sequence. When you let go, it stops. If we take keyboard trigger off, if we set that to none, now and I had to hit the note again to make the keyboard trigger off fire. MIDI sync is pretty obvious. Once that's gone, then you're into hertz. Nice and simple. These on buttons down here just basically interrupt the sequence. So it just makes that note fire. These knobs down here tell you which next note to go to. So generally speaking, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1 is how you step from sequence to sequence. If you only wanted a 4-note sequence, then when you get here, set that to 1. Okay. And the knob is actually the same as just picking up that number itself and dragging it. They do exactly the same thing. Here we have a smooth effect for the chain. You can add a different smoothing effect on the chain channel than the individual lines. You can have independent trigger sources for each of the different sequence columns. So you could have, I don't know, LFO1 triggering the second line of the sequencer. Not a function I ever use, so I was actually struggling to think of a time I'd ever want to use that. I never have, so let's move on. And finally, the sequencer itself can be routed into other modules. It doesn't have to be a sequencer. Well, it is always a sequencer, but it doesn't have to generate a sequence of notes per se. So we're going to have one of these sequence lines apply its control voltages, think of them in terms of control voltages rather than notes. And instead of going into an oscillator and resulting in notes being heard, let's feed them into the filter. So if we go to the VCA and we set this to keyboard trigger on. So let's turn the sequencer off completely. I've simplified the sound a little bit, took the envelope off it because it was doing this meow kind of thing. Taking that off. So we've just got a nice simple sound now. Okay. So if we feed a sequence line into this filter, let's take the sequence 2, these notes, see that, and we've still got the keyboard trigger on, firing the sequencer. So now these control voltages, these offsets, are being fed into the LPF, the low pass filter, and they're having an effect on the filter sound itself. Okay. So again, an example of trying not to think about these modules as specific like synth components and thinking of them in terms of modular components, just dealing in voltages, just sending signals of either varying waves or fixed amounts onto the next location. Then your sequencer then becomes an 8, 16 or 24 step generator that's able to apply some kind of modulation effect to another component of the system. So this is a different sequence. Okay. In terms of general introductions, that's probably as much as we can handle in one go. When we come to deal with some of the presets, then we'll see the sequencer being used in lots of these different flexible environments, and we'll really see the beauty of it as an integrated component of the whole thing. Hope that made some sense, and I look forward to seeing you for the next episode. I'll see you then. Thanks very much for watching.